Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach, and in this short audio presentation, we're going to follow up on why good ideas fail by looking at why entrepreneurs have trouble with these kinds of challenges and some of the things that they can do to help overcome those challenges, to help ensure that their technologies are adopted in the market. Entrepreneurs get this wrong. Great ideas aren't always good enough to convince customers to purchase. And so we want to think about what those underlying elements are and some of the tactics that entrepreneurs can use to increase the probability of their product being adopted. This is often referred to as the innovator's curse. The fact is that entrepreneurs self-select. That is, a typical innovator is usually not the typical consumer. The innovator is in effect ahead of the curve, right? So the innovator understands this and has thought about it a lot, but the customer hasn't. And so this results in a clash of perspective. The customer overweighs the benefits of the status quo by 2 to 3 times, right? So this goes back to the prospect theory and endowment theory that we talked about in the last presentation. Customers don't like to give up what they already have. In the meantime, the developer or the innovator is overweighing the benefits of the new product by 2 to 3 times. That is, in their mind, it's incredibly valuable, above and beyond the actual benefit that the customer actually gets, because the developer, the innovator, tends to be very emotionally involved and attached to the innovation. The result of this is that the innovator thinks the innovation is worth 4 to 9 times as much as the customer thinks it's worth. Well, that is clearly going to be a problem because the innovator is thinking that the customer should be willing to pay 5 times as much for this as what it currently purchases, and the customer is under the impression that this isn't even worth switching away from their old product for. Second is this knowledge gap. The innovator has years of experience with the idea. Customer is usually seeing it for the first time. So while the innovator knows that the need is there, right, because they've studied this and thought about it and developed this product or service to meet the need, sometimes the customer has simply never even thought about it. And sometimes it's enough to simply point it out, but very often it's not. And while the innovator is convinced that this will work and make the customer's life better, customer is often under the impression that change is unnecessary. I'm happy with what I have, and I don't get why you're trying to sell me this new thing. We can think about this a little more carefully and rigorously by looking at both the amount of product change that's involved in an idea or innovation and the behavioral change requirement for the customer to actually adopt the new technology. And you may remember this goes back to the innovation marketplace that we talked about at the beginning of the course, understanding why it's so difficult for customers to change behaviors. And so we can put this onto a 2x2 matrix, looking at product change being low to high, and the required behavioral change being low to high. And then we can look at each of these quadrants to sort of see how likely those innovations are to be adopted and what the ultimate impact will be. And in fact, we can think about this in a little more qualitative way. So when product change is low, that is, the new product's not particularly different than the old product, but it requires a ton of behavioral change, that's a strikeout. That's a situation where there's just not enough value and the customer is going to have to do too much differently. They're just not likely to be interested. On the other hand, if the product change is low and the behavioral change is low, we have something that's, a little bit better than what's already out there and doesn't require the customer to do too much differently. That could work. We call that incremental innovation or tinkering because it's just sort of a tweak on an existing product or service. When product change is high, so there's a significant innovation, but the behavioral change is high as well, we sometimes refer to those as long hauls. That is, there's a ton of benefit to be obtained, but it's probably going to take a while to convince customers to change behavior on a systemic basis. And then you have your home runs. Home runs are where there's a ton of product change, there's a lot of value that you can get, but customers really don't have to do anything differently. And those are the big winners, the ones where there's just so much to be gained for customers, and yet there's very little that they have to do any differently than what they did previously. So let's just take a quick look at some examples of these. So for example, we could look at the new launch of a new flavored soft drink. And in this case, we're showing that here's Dr. Pepper, and here you have Diet Cherry Vanilla Dr. Pepper. So clearly there's no change in behavior. You purchase it the same way, you utilize the product in the same way. And the change itself is not that significant. It's probably going to taste very similar with some slightly different flavors in it. This is tinkering, and it, if it's done well and there's good marketing and there's good and this is something customers might like, then there's a reasonably good chance it will succeed. It's not going to be it's unlikely to be a massive win for the company. It's not going to overtake all other soft drinks most likely, but it's probably good incremental product innovation. Strikeouts you're also probably very familiar with. You may remember our conversation about why the Dvorak keyboard has not succeeded compared to the QWERTY keyboard when we had our conversation about the innovation marketplace. The incremental benefit's not very clear, and it requires a big change in behavior. And so this is an example of a technology that simply was not successful. And you read about another example, the Better Place electric car technology business. And this was unsuccessful because, again, it just required too much change on behalf of customers. Now, part of this was the entire infrastructure that was associated around the business, but at the core, the business was meant to be an electric vehicle company. And so you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute now, electric vehicles are beginning to make progress, and that's true. And we can talk a little bit about companies like Tesla, which at the beginning, many people were very skeptical of, and it has taken a fair amount of time. Keep in mind, Tesla itself has not made money. This is a company that is still running a significant deficit and is continuing to require infusions of capital to keep it going. But certainly there is adoption of the cars in the marketplace, and we might think and hope in some ways that this will ultimately be a long-haul success. It took a long time because it's requiring a lot of customer change, but there's enough perceived new value in what Tesla cars offer that customers are beginning to switch over. What about those home run innovations? Well, do you recognize any of these four businesses? I know all of them, perhaps only because I'm older than most of you, I would imagine. These were the original internet search engine companies. These were the companies that, as the World Wide Web was being developed, were providing a mechanism to search content on the internet. And the problem was that at the time, people didn't really understand how to search for content, and websites were not taking steps in order to make their content searchable. And so each of these companies had some modicum of success associated with its early development. But what they really did was educate customers and the suppliers and the websites about how to make online search work. And as all of that was coming together, a new search technology emerged that was a much more effective and efficient way for people to identify and access the information they wanted on the internet. And it worked in exactly the same way that these companies worked, but it was better. The PageRank algorithm provided a much more effective mechanism for ensuring that people were getting the search results that they wanted. And so this was a situation in which PageRank was a huge step up in quality and value for customers, but it did not require them to change fundamentally how they actually behaved online. And that led to one of the most successful technology companies of the last 20 years, which is, of course, an organization that you're very familiar with. And as I record this audio presentation, Google just this week reached $1 trillion in market capitalization. So Google was clearly an example of a home run. So how do you improve your odds? If you're an entrepreneur trying to bring a new innovation to market, well, one, you have to accept the fact that resistance is going to happen. You might have to brace for the long haul. Don't imagine that first mover advantage is as great as it sounds. Be prepared to alter your plan. Assume that 10% improvement over your competitors is not going to be enough. I'm not a huge fan of the 10x thing. This is a rule that's come about as people have talked about certain aspects of lean startup thinking, but it's certainly a better approach. If your product is really 10 times better, it has a much better chance than simply 10% better. And then minimize resistance. Make it behaviorally compatible. The less your customers have to change, the more likely they are to adopt it. Seek out customers who don't have a product already in place. It's much easier to sell to someone who's never bought one of these before than it is to sell to someone who's happy with what they've already purchased. Target customers who don't have to give up an existing competitor. Find believers. Find customers who are really excited about innovation and who are interested in trying new technologies. If it's an option, you could look at eliminating old technologies. Government mandates are what has significantly resulted in, for example, pushing toward zero-emission automobiles, getting rid of incandescent bulbs in favor of compact fluorescent light bulbs and now LEDs. In many ways, this is why the dollar coin, or the single unit coin, has been successful in Canada and the UK versus in the US. The US simply chose never to phase out the dollar bill. And both the UK and Canada just said, look, we're going to have £1 coins and Canadian dollar coins, and eventually the bills are going to go away, and the population adjusted. Reduce the complexity of the customer purchase process. If you can change how they pay for it to reduce their perceived risk, you'll improve the odds that they'll adopt. Make the upfront cost low. Change it from buying all at once to paying a monthly fee. You can think about how software or cell phones or even satellite radio, these subscription technologies make it seem cheaper because you don't have to pay for it all at once. Also, generating strong customer guarantees, that is, having third parties show that your product actually works, or find ways to share the risk so that other organizations help with the customer adoption process, or maybe even do consulting projects that price based on savings if you're a business-to-business company. Encourage your potential customers to hire you on as your business on to help them take the new technology in, and then the price you charge them is based on how much money they save for using the new product. It's a good idea not to rely on the experts too much, and there's a whole set of examples of times where people who were absolutely the top experts in their field made terrible predictions about how things were going to develop when IBM thought there would never be a market for more than a few computers, or when Warner, who founded Warner Brothers, said, "Who the hell wants to hear actors talk?" That was at the time when movies were still silent. Or even Bill Gates, who said no one will ever need more than 637K of memory for a personal computer. The bottom line to all of this is that people really don't like change, and customers don't like to change what they're doing. And if your opportunity is going to have a chance of success, you need to plan accordingly. You need to design your product or service to maximize benefit with the minimum change that's required on behalf of the customers. Plan for it to be adopted slower than you might expect. And remember that even home run products have had haters. There are people who never liked Google and still don't. And you have to choose not to be discouraged. So I hope that over these two audio presentations, you've gotten an opportunity to think a little bit about why good products still fail and some of the things that you might be able to do as an entrepreneur in order to give your idea the best potential chance for success in the market.